How did becoming a doctor create an identity, but not a person?
Oof. Well, medicine is one of those professions where what it takes to become a physician today, certainly a surgeon, which is what I did, it asks a lot of you. The toll is very exacting. And part of that toll that we're asked to pay is really that our identity become completely wrapped up in being a physician. That is both, a badge of honor that's worn proudly by many physicians, but it also is dangerous. And that's what I think a lot of us are kind of grappling more with, which is that, when your job is your whole life or your professional identity is your entire identity, then a tough day at work or a tough interpersonal relationship at work, things like that, they aren't just waves that we have to ride over the course of a long life. They become threatening to like our core and livelihood and identity.
How early on in your life did your parents express their desire in you wanting to become a doctor?
Like earliest memories that I have, which would be probably 5 to 9 or so. Like I don't have a ton of memories from that time, but I do remember them saying like, the food that you like is expensive. Don't you want to be able to afford this when you grow up? Like, you have to become a doctor to be able to afford like white meat chicken.
Wow. And how did being an only child accentuate those pressures?
Well, a lot of the language, and I am half Chinese, so I was raised in a half Chinese household, culturally pretty Chinese. But the rhetoric was like, we need a doctor in the family. Right, and again, that's why I speak to the Asian heritage part, because that's actually, like, kind of unusual vernacular. I don't see that as much in the US, but we need a doctor in the family. We don't have any doctors in the family, and we do have lawyers in the family. My dad was a lawyer. We have a CFO in the family. My mom was in finance, right? Like, we have all these things, so we need a doctor. And if I were not an only child, I guarantee I would have been trying to put everything into a sibling, like, "I'm tapping you to do that. I wanna go do something different."
You're saying within Chinese culture, it's seen across the board of we need a physician or a doctor within our family?
I just think that in Chinese culture, like, they differently are looking at, like, cross-generational, family legacy in a different way. So, not just saying, like, that all Chinese families need a doctor in the family or anything like that, but I just mean, like, they are looking holistically at, like, the family, the legacy. I'm looking at it in a zoomed out many generational level in a way that, again, the US doesn't have, like, a long history of that multi-generational thinking.
So you went to a Catholic private school and then you transferred to a boarding school at 13, Illinois Math and Science Academy, and
Mhm.
then you started at Notre Dame when you were 16. So very, very impressive path. How much of that felt like a natural unfolding of a path that you wanted to be on versus kind of what you were saying here, pressure from your parents, almost like survival by success?
It honestly felt natural at the time. It really did. It didn't feel forced and it didn't feel fake, but I do think that, like, with hindsight or now looking at it from the adult perspective, like, I think my dad would have said when I was 11 years old, "Frances May wants to be the first female surgeon general." And I probably would have agreed wholeheartedly. I would have said, "No, I agree. That's awesome." But, like, when we start to break that down, how many 10-year-olds know about the surgeon general job? Like, part of it is that I was impressionable, and I do think that I wanted to succeed. I wanted to make my family proud. So, again, kids are like a repository of whatever you feed them, right? And so, but that being said, no, I feel like I was bought into it the whole time.
You were also very creative as a kid, you said, and you thought that you wanted to be a graphic designer and, you were energized by art. Where did that spark within your childhood come from?
Yeah, I think I've always been a very visual person. I'm a Libra. I'm a September Libra. I love for things to be like curated and gorgeous and like thoughtful in their layout. So I think that um That's something I've always been interested in. And yeah, graphic design at the college level, I was a biochem major and I rowed on the Notre Dame women's rowing team. So I did not really have any wiggle room to add like a minor in graphic design or anything.
The class that did play a pivotal role for you when you were at Notre Dame was your junior year, a medical ethics class.
Mhm.
What was it about that class that gave you so much clarity on the path forward that you wanted to take?
What's interesting and definitely not unique to my story is that there were some really pivotal, formative physicians who I met along the way, along my career, and they were so incredible, so electric that that pulled me in. This is what happened with that gentleman. The man who taught our medical ethics class, he was a priest and a physician. He was a medicine doctor. And I mean, just absolutely like lousy with charisma. He spoke really beautifully about the fiduciary physician patient relationship. And not only that, but medical ethics specifically dealt a lot with like end of life questions and care, palliative care that I had a huge interest in, pretty innately. But I think that what's funny about that is that obviously a lot of us like go into medicine for X or Y or Z reason. And, not to spoil the ending, but flash forward to today, that fiduciary physician patient relationship is hanging on by a thread, if even that anymore.
Did that ethics class initially confirm the feelings that you felt because you've shared that your med school years, those were some of the best years of your life? Why exactly was that?
Yeah, they were wonderful. I mean, I love learning. I actually like studying. Studying is like I mean, I'm almost a professional studier when you look at my long CV and my career. So I like studying. I like learning physiology and pathophysiology. That's a lot of the first 2 years of medical school. I really loved it. Like I was good at it, but I also enjoyed doing my homework and going to small group and things like that. I also think that in medical school, the teachers that we had really did like foster that desire to learn. They fostered diversity. I went to a pretty progressive medical school that I just really enjoyed being a part of.
Are med school professors, are those usually doctors and surgeons who are retired who then go to teach in med school, or how does somebody get on the path of teaching in med school?
I think there's a lot of different ways in, and it also matters like what year you're teaching. First and second year felt like souped up college. Medical school is 4 years in total. And years 1 and 2, like those are in the classroom. They are in lecture halls. Yes, they're in an anatomy lab. People may have seen that depicted on TV. That's like cadaver lab where you're learning, safely in a very controlled way, like looking at nerves in the arm and things like that. Um, but that was like regular school, and the teachers that we had were pretty much doing that full time. Like they were educators. They were in medical education. Whether they, yeah, had a MD, a lot had like PhDs or masters or things like that, and they were so committed to our education. Third year, as a medical student, you start going into the hospital for rotations. Same thing really for fourth year. So third and fourth year, it's not college anymore. It's not like sitting in a classroom. We did some small group work and we had some intermittent lectures, but it was mostly go learn in the hospital for 2 years. So I just say that because the way that I understand my education is that the brunt of the curriculum was from people who loved med ed and were doing this full time. We did have 4 specific topics, such as ENT, which is what I ended up going into, ear, nose, and throat, like head and neck surgery. We had one lecture on that in medical school, and an ENT surgeon working full time at the hospital walked over to like give us an hour-long PowerPoint. So, that was fine. Was that ever like the really bombastic type of teaching? No, that would be like a surgeon just shuffling over to give a talk that they get a little bit of credit for and then they leave.
To lay the groundwork before we get into your specific ENT residency experience, can you just explain exactly what residency is and the goals and the purpose behind it?
Mhm. Yep, I think that a lot of the general public would be shocked to to know what is going on in residency. So I think there's been like a deliberate obfuscation of that from patients and their families. So basically what happens in the US is that you have to go to medical school to get an MD degree or a DO degree. There are schools for that as well. So you graduate with an MD or a DO. It is a Herculean feat to get that degree, but if you don't go to residency, FYI, you can't do anything clinical with it. So the path to becoming a doctor in the US today is undergraduate in whatever type of pre-med or pre-med counting thing, 4 years of medical school, then 3 to 7 years of residency. That is where you are quote unquote an employee. Like you work at the hospital. You make typically between like $50,000 and $70,000 a year. That's obviously, it depends regionally. It depends on the specialty a little bit and your year, because you get like a $2,000 raise every year. But you go and you do that work. At the end of residency, you graduate and then you take your board exams. At that point, once you've passed those, like once you've graduated from a residency and you've taken boards, now you can go practice and you can do whatever you want, in what you're licensed to do. So that is how it works. But it also is very interesting because the reality is that if you have ever been to like a teaching hospital, one of these academic or teaching hospitals, people would not believe the degree to which probably a lot of your care involved resident physicians or was on the backs of resident physicians. I know of many residency programs in the country where the attendings don't even see the patients who they get consulted on. Residents can do and document all of the brunt of that work.
And what was your perception of the path that you thought you were about to get into with your residency before your residency actually started?
I had heard a lot of bad things about residency as early as middle school, just because we had some family friends who were going through residency in Chicago at the time. They were living in like subsidized housing. It's like you get a shoebox with some bugs in it. And again, you get paid $50,000 to $70,000 salary a year. May not sound, egregiously low to everyone. Obviously, if we start to look at comparisons to other graduate level degrees like an MD, it is objectively pretty low, but what people need to do really quickly in their mental math is take into account the number of hours we're working, because it is 80 to 100 hours a week. And so don't think of that as like, is this a fair salary for a person working a job? Well, it's like 2 to 2.5 jobs. And so, it's interesting how apparent some of the discordance becomes when you look at it that way. But to answer your question, I'd heard bad things about residency. The sleep deprivation, the raw number of hours, the stress of taking care of really sick people, like being exposed to significant morbidity and mortality, like that takes a toll. And so I understood that, and I feel like I was willing to deal with that, experience it in my, goals to pursue becoming a surgeon. And so the reason why I was so rapidly disillusioned and, frankly terrified and ill-equipped when I showed up to residency is because all of that stuff, the bad street reputation of residency, it did occur. We were very sleep deprived. It was pretty crazy and busy all the time. And again, it's just really sad to deal with illness and death all the time. Fine. That wasn't the hard part. It was actually the culture, the malignant behavior, and really overt bullying and things like that. I don't feel like people warned us very much about that, probably for a reason, because if you start warning people, like it would have been enough to deter me from going into it.
And when was the first inkling that you got of that when you were in residency?
Maybe as a witness intern year. But again, like when it doesn't happen to you or you witness it, you just say, maybe I don't have all the facts. Like, yeah, this attending is screaming at a fellow. She's 33 years old, like a mom and wife. She's being screamed at, like just lit up. But when you're a medical student, a 3 and 4 in the hospital, and when you're an intern, like I just didn't even have enough context for what was going on. Like maybe she did something wrong. She's being screamed at. Um, and I'm just rotating through. So I do feel like, but even part of that is probably a self-protective like denial process. Cause I do think that when I really go back and look and think, I'm like, man, did I see hints of this as a third and fourth year medical student? And I did, but I totally ignored them and again did some mental gymnastics around it. I think that for me personally, my second year of residency was when I really started to say, whoa, things are just off the rails here. Like the hazing, the bullying, the lack of consequences for any poor behavior. Um, it was pretty egregious.
And your second year is when you started to experience it for yourself, or was it still more so of you just witnessing it, but with new eyes?
Still witnessing it, but also experiencing for myself, I would say. We had a fifth year resident, a chief that year. They're like kind of in charge. And he was just pretty much off the rails and um, allowed to do whatever he wanted to us or to patients or to people in the hospital.
Either from Notre Dame or your med school at this time, did it feel like you had any mentors that you could go back to and confide in?
Yeah, that's interesting because the answer is truthfully no. I do think that some of that is like the culture of medicine, which is just that, like, I mean, I confided to some mentors even at the program, some attendings. I'd say, hey, this awful thing happened. This guy screamed at me in the OR until I cried, and he threw all of his instruments and he stormed out. And literally, the advice I was getting in real time from mentors, from surgeons at that program was, that sucks. I'm sorry it happened. It sucks. It's happened to me. It does happen. So, in terms of even reaching back to people from my past, like, no, and they couldn't have done anything different. And not only that, but we're very much discouraged from showing weakness in any way. There's like a lot of famous documents floating around out there, like swimming with sharks, a primer. And at some programs, they were giving it to interns on their first day, and it was like, don't let them smell blood. Like they'll attack you relentlessly. And I've certainly witnessed that to be true. Like if they see somebody getting emotional or crying a little bit, they'll just go in and eviscerate you until you want to die.
So you need to become emotionally numb. Emotional numbness is a strength.
Yep, numbness or just dissociation. Yeah. And whatever you can do to numb yourself and just cope. And there's several maladaptive ways to cope. I've probably seen every way from a resident and experienced a bunch myself. I do think that the degree to which it's a lawless, really like egregiously malignant environment, or the degree to which it can be, makes it really hard for there to be like adequate, healthy coping mechanisms.
Would you express these feelings to your parents at the time?
My dad died the year I graduated from Notre Dame. So he was not around. To my mom, I would say, you know, works pretty hard. The people are not super nice there. We speak Shanghainese at home. So like translated, I'd just be like, it's really, I don't like it there. People aren't super nice, this type of stuff. And she would say, you have the best job in the world. You're a doctor, which would only like further, my consternation.
Did you develop any resentment towards your mom, you felt like?
Mm, not like develop in real time then. I think she was responding in residency the way that I would have guessed that she would respond, fairly on brand.
I'm trying to envision the perspective of the attending physician and almost like if I was interviewing an attending, like if I were to ask them, why does this type of environment get created and using, insults or tactics to scare people, is there like, I'm assuming they would say that doesn't exist, or like, is there like an argument that they would say of, needing
Yeah,
to create a hostile environment?
100%. Yeah, no, I've asked. So obviously I can't speak on behalf of other people, but I can tell you what like a lot of people have and do say, which is they say, well, being a surgeon's a really hard job and you're under extraordinary duress. and like you're saving lives. You need to be able to, under duress or under hostility, show up to an airway emergency. That's what we do as ENTs. Like that's kind of our big emergency, but this person's losing their airway. You might have to slash trach them and save their life. So yeah, are we making conditions unpleasant? Yes, but you're going to be grateful for it because when you're out there practicing alone, this is what will make you a great surgeon. So like the unpleasant conditions and us being hard on you, it is necessary. People will also argue this is how we train surgeons. Like this is what happened to me. I became a great surgeon because of it, and you will become a great surgeon because of it. There's also a lot of othering. They'll just say like, so if you don't like this, if you don't like being screamed at, insulted, belittled, publicly humiliated, you're just a weak person and you should not be a surgeon. Like, should we be looking at getting rid of you? Like, it's just the problem would be you if you don't buy into this level of treatment. Another thing that happens is that I've seen this. I'm old enough that I've seen this. People will come in really like quite nice people, right? On intern day one. By the time that they're a senior resident now as a fourth or fifth year, they are very happy to have their own little crew to bully. So there's very much like a cycle that goes on. And frankly, to their credit, because I hate people being fake about this, to their credit, a lot of surgeons I know would be like, no, I admit that conditions are like not very favorable for a person to like be healthy or feel psychologically safe, right? Like they don't care. So they'll be like, yeah, are we creating psychological safety? We aren't. But like, if you can't do all this work under duress, how will you ever be ready to just become a surgeon alone?
It's ironic. It's like, hey, if you're not strong enough, this work can break you. So we're just going to break you instead.
It doesn't hold up. Like it doesn't hold water under examination.
So your junior year at Notre Dame, that shows you the light of this path that you want to take. How did your fourth year of residency really show you the danger of this path?
Yeah, I think I gritted my teeth for a very long time and I dissociated for a very long time. So before I really knew it, I was halfway through my fourth year when I finally, like, I think a lot of conditions, just like the perfect storm, occurred for this case with a known really malignant attending. Like she was brutal. It's not uncommon for female surgeons. I hear this echoed all the time where they'll be like, you know, it isn't a good old boys club. Male dominated fields are, surgery being one of them, ENT surgery being one of them. And, these old guys, they'll scream at you and they'll make you feel like dirt. And I have a plethora of those experiences and stories. But it does kind of hit different. It's very cutting when it is like a young woman, which is actually what it was in this case. Like it wasn't even a many generations older woman. It was just like a young woman. But she was pretty nasty to her residents. So anyway, we're in a 8-hour long melanoma cancer case. And when she really started going in on me, again, I think I showed a little weakness because I was like starting to feel like, oh, I might cry. And I remember thinking, if I had a minute to just collect myself, I won't cry. Probably a lot of people can identify with that feeling where they're like on the brink, but they're like, I could probably not if just everyone was quiet for a second. She just kept going in and just kept grilling me. She was like, what's this? What's this? And I was like, I apologize. I'm a little flustered. I'm not sure. And she was like, did you even study for this? And when I said yes, she was like, well, what'd you read? Like, tell me the names of the books. Like, there's no possible way that you studied for this. And then yet now you can't like tell me every single step and also tell me like what structure this tiny nerve is. So, I started crying even when I was crying. And this goes back to kind of like why I think resident physician abuse is an important topic for everyone. Because I'm not arguing like, hey, they're just beating up residents like in a little box separate from society. I was crying out the bottom of my mask, down into my gown. I literally could not see anything through copious tears. she was still having me bovying in the neck. I mean, I still had a bipolar in my hand. So I was still expected to assist on this surgery. I am blind from tears. Also, from a sterility standpoint, making your trainees cry and get tears in the field, that's not a sterile, clean situation. So, it does matter. It has public health implications for this culture to be going on. But what's nice about the OR, what's protective for abusers, is just that it is closed doors to the outside world, right? Okay. So anyway, after I started crying, she still didn't let up. So then eventually I just said, I can't see. May I step out and go to the bathroom? And she was like, fine. And I left, and I never went back in to that case. And that was really my breaking point in my day of, yeah, I felt a lot of shame about leaving the OR, because we've talked a lot about, surgeons definitely are not allowed to do that. You can't leave and not go back. But I do think that one other thing that has always stood out about that day is that when I was hiding in the bathroom near the ORs and I couldn't stop sobbing, and I called one of my co-residents, and I was a girlfriend of mine, and I told her what happened, and I was like, it was so awful, and I want to die. And she was very kind. She was like, you're okay. You're okay. This has happened to me a bunch of times. Once you stop crying, just go back in and you'll be fine. This girl planned my bachelorette party. We'd been together in these trenches for many years, and this is the extent to which it's stigmatized and people don't talk about it. And one would not even admit to a best friend, hey, they made me cry in the OR and I had to step out for 2 minutes.
That language of using "I want to die," is that the first time that you had felt those sentiments?
Oh, no, I feel like I found residency very incompatible with life.
Yeah, so that one day, obviously, it's very challenging. And going back to the one-dimensional identity that med school and residency and medicine in general can just create and promotes to a degree, how does a challenge like that not simply just feel like a challenge, but it really manifests as a threat on your life?
Yeah, I just couldn't imagine what else I was going to do. I also feel shame will kill you. So when you feel well, I've set out to accomplish something, and then if you feel you aren't accomplishing it, the shame for a person who's depending on that external validation, that can be kind of life-threatening. But I do genuinely feel I was in my late 20s. I had a graduate degree. I'm a smart person. And it's scary how real that felt, that I was I can't do anything else. I had really decided, I hate it here. I am not seeing that I can make it work here. I don't respect the people. The work is a nightmare. So I don't see it here. But I was but I can't do anything else. I don't have other skills. How could I enter a workforce? And I think that also is something that shocks a lot of people. Physicians are some of the smartest people in our society, if at least from a book smart standpoint. We're not talking street smarts. I'm not going to make that argument. But I don't think a lot of people think of physicians as extremely helpless and trapped. They would be shocked to know what is going on behind the scenes and how the workforce actually feels.
It's interesting. It's like a prisoner to a degree. You don't know how to re-enter into society.
Yes, and they act like you shouldn't and can't ever. They're not preparing us to someday re-enter society. It is its own separate whole, it's a calling, right? This is the argument though, and kudos to Gen Z, because I do see them pushing back on it. I know a handful of Gen Z physicians who are this is a job. This is not a calling. It's not really different from me working at McDonald's. So you can't treat me this way, and you can't underpay me by 300%. And they're breaking some of the old traditions in that regard.
To what degree do you think you can find that balance?
Between a calling and a job?
Being able to treat, medicine like a job and still having a life outside of it and an identity.
I mean, I didn't crack that code, fortunately, because like I didn't want to. So I wasn't motivated to do it. I will say it's not unlike some things that I do grapple in my daily life, though. Like I'm a CEO at a physician media company at my startup. I just took on a chief medical officer job for a really great business that I've come onto. And like my professional identity is definitely still too tied to my core human identity. So I'm still fighting the same fight. It's just like not clinical at all. But a lot of us are the types of personalities drawn to this work. Like we are working machines. So to answer your question about balance, I have not found it for myself, and I don't even know that I have role models who have it, because when I think of my role models in business and entrepreneurship now, they are saying like, if you know a CEO who doesn't work on weekends, either they're lying or they're like, the business isn't doing very well, then they just like nothing's going on. That would be pretty atypical. And so I guess that I'm at a point in my life where it isn't quote unquote balance that I even am gunning for, but if I feel like all the trade-offs I'm making in my life feel good to me and fair to me, then that's like how I would define success or peace, which in my case, it does mean working weekends, but what other flexibility do I get?
Yeah, it's being able to tap into those bodily intuitions in a way and just checking in with yourself and be like, yeah, this does feel right. I mean, how did med school? I mean, I know that you had dealt with some health issues that really started to happen when you were in residency, but you kind of just like didn't, like I was saying, you really didn't tap into your body or those symptoms. What has it been like, your relationship with your body and your health through everything?
Yes, it is so important to live in your body. And again, I don't know any surgeons who do that because our work feels like it's demanding of us. Like, don't drink water, don't be hydrated. Like, I would not get a bathroom break for 10 hours at a time easily. So just don't drink when you wake up and enter a case dehydrated, be dehydrated all day. Um, I don't feel like we got much nutrition. The doctor's lounges are just filled with like crackers and like fig Newtons, just preservative type food. Like, yeah, I do think that a lot of us just ignore all bodily cues. We also work through illness. I can't count the number of times I had like strep throat or the flu and just like still worked through it. But it has been the gift of a lifetime to live in my body now. I'm down 40 pounds from what I weighed, you know, as an attending, like coming out of residency. And I'm 6 feet tall. So I feel like I carried the weight pretty well. I'm not sure that anyone would necessarily, but maybe. Like the fact is that it's shocking that I am down 40 pounds because I wouldn't have necessarily been like knowing that I had that much to lose. But the cortisol consistently, I had bleeding stomach ulcers. My last year of clinical practice as an attending, my TMJ is still a battle now, not because my TMJ is really bad right now, but like all of these joint related things, the damage that I did for like 7 years on my jaws, I'm just stuck with that. So I'm working a lot on like not making it worse, but you can't reverse time. So certainly when I talk to other people, I'm like, yeah, I don't recommend not living in your body for like the better part of a decade. I think that you got to pay the piper.
It's incredible how a profession that is completely dedicated to caring for people can fail to help the person who's doing the caring.
There's a huge double standard. It really is like, I've even seen a lot of these attendings, like some of the really awful, like the ones who treat trainees like dirt, like they treat them like worms. They're like, you don't even have basic labor laws protecting you. And they'll be like compassionate towards a patient. And they'll be like, oh my gosh, you need like a note for an exemption for work, post-op. Absolutely. Like 2 weeks, absolutely. Let's do all this. But then they'll turn to us and be like incredibly nasty. And they'll be like, shut up about the flu. Like, I don't care if your fever is 104, 105. And you can hear this. Part of it is that surgeons are terrified of being retaliated against. And so most people won't share these stories publicly, but like in private circles, most people are like, yeah, I ended up in the emergency room. I waited until like I had signed out for the night call group to cover me, and then I went to the ED, and then like I was out the next morning to show up back at work. And there would be these unwritten rules of like, if you're going to miss work because you're sick, you better be hospitalized. Like you better have proof of like an actual hospitalization is like the barometer for how sick you have to not be in here. So I do think that there's a double standard going on and just a general dehumanization of the future doctor or like the current new fledgling doctor. I also think that patients see this play out because when I was practicing ENT full time here, I had a decent chunk of patients, maybe 10, 15%, who would come in and they'd be like, I'm here for a second opinion. I went and saw another ENT. They were so nasty to me and my family. They made me cry in my doctor's visit. And so I want a second opinion about my sinuses. And I'd be like, I'm so sorry that you had that experience, right? Like, that's scary. That's awful. It's the last thing a sick person needs. But I'm also, obviously, I'm not shocked because I feel like some of the facades are cracking.
Mm.
You can imagine how those people treat their own staff, their own learners, like behind closed doors. But even now, it feels like patients are sometimes seeing who these people really are.
And I think that affects the level of care. Like, that doesn't just live within somebody's experience. And if we're talking about the nervous system, it's like, okay, that is having an effect on my health then.
100%. And not only that, but people will use the thought exercise of, would you rather have a surgeon who's like 85th percentile hands and they're a nice person? Their team likes them in the OR. Or would you rather have like the 98th percentile surgeon, some of the best hands in the world, but they are a bully. They scare the whole OR team, everything like that. I would always pick the former because, again, this goes back to what the general public doesn't appreciate is that surgery is a team activity. And when your first assist or your scrub tech is terrified of you, they're more likely to make mistakes. Same thing about medical students or residents in your room. Like, I think it is literally less safe.
And obviously, a traditional doctor would probably tell me, "Oh, that's crazy talk." But I'm a big believer, just like on an energetic level, like almost like a spiritual level way. Like the energy that's in the room, like that is not going to be good for somebody's health.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think that I wouldn't have understood at all 10 years ago, but like I legitimately have seen that um play out and experienced it.
As time has gone on, what's your own internal relationship like with the people who created this hostile environment for you and maybe had insulted you?
Oh, I mean, I'm 4 years out from residency. My book Surgeon on the Edge came out this spring. I think I really healed from all of that in a way that I'm very lucky because a lot of my colleagues who are especially still practicing, they just squish it down and they try to never look at it or think about it, but also often subconsciously or not like perpetuate all of that abuse and things like that. Um, so I'm happy. I really do feel like I put in an extraordinary amount of time and effort into not being a person who, like, when I'm 40, 6 years from now, I'm not going to still be traumatized by my residency. And a lot of 40-year-olds I know cannot say that. I also think that, you know, pivoting into other work, building a portfolio career, like I really do subscribe to a lot of the stoic ideas of like amor fati, love of fate type stuff. Like I am at a good place in my life. And so even though it took like a decade plus really unpleasant detour, I wouldn't have become a CEO at 33 if I hadn't become an ENT first. I wouldn't be a CMO now at 34. So I do feel like let bygones be bygones, but also I think that because a lot of my work now is at the systems level, I take it less personally. I mean, I still don't. I think we're all ultimately responsible for our behavior, and I am proud to say I didn't make somebody cry my whole 5 years of residency. It's just possible. Like, you can even have the instinct to yell at someone and then just not yell at them. But hurt people hurt people. And so all of those senior residents and attendings who abused us, they even used to say this. They used to say, "You have it so easy." My seniors were much worse on me when I was in training. And frankly, like, that might be true. Still not a useful or relevant or legitimate excuse, but like that might be. So I do feel like um it's a just much worthier opponent to look at. Well, what's wrong with this system and culture? Because it's not unique to my department. It's not unique to my specialty. Um, as opposed to like, oh, these people were like prolific jerks, and what, I had the worst luck in the world to randomly be paired up with some of the biggest jerks. That's really not it.
I want to talk about your business work, but before we get to that, just some personal work that you did that I find really interesting. What was your experience like with both therapy and hypnosis?
Yes, I found hypnosis really, really helped me so much. When I was in residency, therapy, just talk therapy, helped me a lot. And DBT, dialectic behavioral therapy. Those were the thing. And I'd never heard of DBT. I'd not really heard of CBT, which goes back to like, I think that we had one day in medical school that touched on CBT. So sure, maybe I had like an academic, like a basic intro, never even heard of DBT. And not only that, but DBT skills have been adapted for a variety of unique populations, which I think doctors, young future physicians and physicians are like a unique population subject to all this stuff. So, um, DBT and talk therapy at that time did help me figure out a way to just run out the clock on the last 18 months of residency. So, kept gritting my teeth, finished, graduated. But when I graduated and I started practicing, as you can imagine, the trauma did not just evaporate. And in fact, I hated going to the hospital. I also think that you can see it's like the profession is not doing a good job of training future generations of physicians, because like I'm not alone in that. A lot of people come out hating going to the hospital. And so think about how that's going to play out energetically and also functionally and operatively. Um, but I basically was having like bad enough PTSD at the hospital that I reached out to a hypnotist in the area, because I was like, I don't even have that much time. I need to like fix this problem, yesterday. Ideally, I wouldn't have like CPTSD in the hospital. But I worked with her for a handful of months, exploratory hypnosis, not suggestive. The suggestive type is more straightforward and it's easier. It's just like smoking cessation, cutting out sugar, different things like that. Exploratory is what my understanding is typically recommended for like CPTSD. And that's what we did. And I guess that I personally believe my hypnotist who told me, that like effective hypnosis can get to where talk therapy would maybe take like 5 years, but we did in like a few months, because it did break down like a lot of different barriers I think that I had to even arriving at the correct answers.
And was hypnosis something that you were receptive to right away and you were the one who sparked that, or did somebody introduce you to hypnosis?
Yeah, no, I think what, like some comedian like Nick Kroll talked about it for smoking cessation or something like that. I feel like I was generally aware of it. What's interesting is one of my girlfriends, a clinical psych PhD, I remember mentioning to her, "Hey, I made an appointment. Like, I know this might sound crazy to you as a clinical psych PhD." And she was like, "No, this is literally like a validated form of therapy." And so I guess I have been in on it the whole time.
Mm. So you left your clinical practice just over a year ago, correct?
Mhm.
How did that feel like, not you just, simply making a decision, but you putting in the work, whether it's through therapy, hypnosis, other things, doing work to feel like you earned the choice to make that decision?
Mhm. I had to give up some things. Biggest one, easily number 1, would have been, like, my ego. There's a famous old joke, "What's the difference between a surgeon and God?" God doesn't think he's a surgeon. So, like a lot of surgeons, yeah, we might be treated like shit for a long time and underpaid for a really long time, but at the end of it, you get to say, "I'm a surgeon. I save lives." Like, here, you get to meet people at parties and be like, "Oh, yeah, what do I do? I'm a head and neck surgeon." That's a pretty elite specialty of surgery. And so part of what you get paid in is like prestige and ego. So I'm never going to lie and say, oh, those things aren't interesting to me. Like, of course, I'm very interested in like power and prestige. I know very few people who go into this line of work and pay all these exacting tolls with no interest in those things. So I had to give it up. I had to be like, either I can live this like half life forever, or what would it take for me to like legitimately leave clinical medicine? Well, it would take untying my identity from this work. It would take me giving up like getting to meet people at parties and just impressing them like, hey, oh, well, I'm an ENT surgeon. Um, and as embarrassing as that is to admit, it was not just super easy to do. I mean, again, people like me and me, like I was one way for 30 full years. But very worthwhile. Like I just do think I'm a lot happier and healthier and again, like 40 pounds lighter for just saying, okay, these are the trade-offs I have to make. I mean, money being another one of them. I was making more than $500,000 a year. So that is not my salary right now. But obviously, I do think that it's helpful to also not have like too limiting of beliefs around all of that. In one of my leadership programs I did like 2 years ago, every woman in my small group said, I am willing to leave my job and take a huge pay cut. Like in order to be free, I would take a huge pay cut to leave. And I remember the moderator like changed my life because when we said that in the big group after we came back in, she was like, I would like to push back on that because why can't you make as much, if not more, doing something that you really love?
Mm.
Again, I'm only 1 year out. So the fact that I took a huge pay cut, like, I think that that's okay. I was prepared for it. I accepted it. And so, I mean, it feels really very okay. But it doesn't mean that I'm also settling like, oh, I'll never make that surgeon money again. I definitely don't feel that way.
How have you become the person today that you needed when you were younger?
I think shame and prestige were both really huge for me. Like they used to run my life. Now they don't. Hopefully I'm a good role model in that regard. And it, again, like I do have a lot of great friends. I have different loved ones who like they didn't fall for that the first time. Shame and prestige don't run their lives already. They're golden. They are like totally fine. But I do think that there's younger people like me. And then it's hopefully helpful for them to hear it sooner rather than later, or like learn things a way other than the hard way.
A big part of that, talk to me about Hippocratic Collective.
Yes, the Hippocratic Collective, it's a physician media company I co-founded with several different physicians, some surgeons, some not. And, we are building out like a whole world for the hidden curriculum of medicine to basically be out in the open in a way that like we believe that, transparency is just going to create a healthier physician workforce and like med ed process. So we have a whole podcast network with a great slate of shows. We've even worked with a couple different institutions. We have some great like limited episode vodcast series coming out this fall with some institutional partners, things like that. We have a very robust publications arm. We have a publishing imprint, but also like op-eds under our progress notes. And so we share our articles from everyone. We have a lot of great columnists, regular contributors, but then also people who want to, submit their own op-eds for consideration from our editorial team. We do in-person events and experiences. And just in general, like somebody has to go first. Medicine has really benefited from, again, that like closed door policy of it's elite, it's a calling, don't worry about what we're doing in here. It's just not working anymore.
What I love about the foundation for Hippocratic Collective is that it's grounded in story. Is that something that right from the start of Hippocratic Collective you knew wanted to be the center, or how did that really come to be?
Yes, I would say story's a big part, and also, like, named stories.
Mm,
What is happening in physician communities now is that certainly, like, the Reddit communities, the anonymous, or even, like, Facebook spots where people can vent and share, those have been around, and they're still around. But what we have found to be really powerful is, like, when a person puts their name and face on it. And so I'm not afraid to go first in that regard. Certainly, my co-founders are different podcast hosts, things like that. Like, those are also people where they're not going to hide behind using, like, a passive voice, or, like, sometimes it can feel like this way. It's just, I was made to feel this way at work.
it's disruptive in the best way possible rather than trying to throw stones at the system. It's basically like, all right, let's create the new generation and disrupt that way. When it came to your book, Surgeon on the Edge, how did that show you that sharing your story wasn't simply just an act of writing, but that was truly part of healing yourself?
Mhm. Yeah, it's so funny. I don't think I felt like I was healing the whole time that I was writing it. Uh, there's a famous quote from Karen Russell, I think is her name, and I love it. It's like, "Writing a book is like climbing Mount Everest and passing your own bones along the way."
Mm.
And I found that to kind of be, like, true to my experience doing it. But it was funny because it's like, then at the mountaintop, like, when the book came out, I looked back and I was like, "Oh, these memories don't hurt me anymore. They don't cause me pain. I don't get, like, pangs of, um, anger." It really is like, I never thought I would say water under the bridge, but it really is. I think that what is so healing about writing, and, I work with a ton of physician authors now, and we do different writing experiences. I run a writers group, a weekly writers group. Because in my own experience 4 years ago, joining Neil Strauss's writers group, um, it was very powerful, and it did exactly what I needed it to do. It broke me out of this, like, trance in the echo chamber of medicine, where I picked the Neil Strauss group because he's just one of my favorite authors. So I joined that writers group. I show up and I was like, here are the essays I have. I already have a literary agent representing the book. Here's some essays I have about the hospital. Pretty much everything we talked about today. I was just like, people will want to hear this. And, you know, there were no other physicians in the group. There was one lawyer, but a lot of, like, artists, a lot of great producers, storytellers, screenwriters, artists, things like that. And they were like, this is just not interesting. This is not anything. And they were totally right, because my storytelling abilities just weren't even that sophisticated at the time. So it was maybe like a report minute by minute of, like, some abuse happening in the OR or something like that. But they were like, this is just not that interesting. And I do feel like that was very freeing to kind of hear, like, some of your most traumatic days of your life, like, they were like, everybody doesn't like their job and has, like, a mean boss at work. So it really, like, helped snap me out of it. And I always was an author who was like, I don't want to rest on my laurels of, like, the MD. A lot of people will forgive bad writing a bit, depending on, like, the degree. But I was like, I want this to be a book that is, like, a good story regardless. And that was helpful. The last quote that I'll share for anyone who is thinking about going through this process themselves, there's a famous quote that's like, if you think it's going to ruin your reputation, it's probably the best thing in the whole piece.
Mm.
These things are all very freeing. And so, like, sorry, this is really the last thing I'll say, but I think that this is so important in how I tie it together in terms of even, like, shame or embarrassment. Like, yeah, I don't feel embarrassed. And it's not because my whole life I've never felt the emotion of embarrassment, but I am saying that what's cool about the artist journey and the artist experience is that, like, if I'm committed to telling the best story possible, if I'm committed to telling the truest story possible, then that's what I'm going to do. And, like, embarrassment, like, the shame has less of a hold over me in that regard, because it doesn't run my life, and I'm committed to a really true, really electric story.
And that's tapping into your body, being able to feel that and release it. And I find it so fascinating. It seems like it was the first time in your life that you were truly able to detach from your experiences. Your entire life, you were internalized, you were consumed. You get it on the page, and you have a group in front of you be able to say, like, oh, this actually isn't that good. And then it, like, just for yourself internally, you're like, oh, maybe this isn't actually as bad. Or, I can work through this. This isn't as damaging to myself and my psyche.
And just feeling like, oh, they'll never respect me if they like learn this about me. Oh, if they know that I cried in the OR, like they'll never respect me. They were like, this isn't anything. Like that seems very normal. If somebody got really close to my face and screamed at me, I'd also cry wherever I was. Like, yeah, it's very humanizing.
Writing takes the power away from our thoughts. The things that eat us up inside, you get it on the page, and it's like, oh, that's actually not that bad.
Mhm.
When it came to your first draft and you shared it with your husband, he said most of that this isn't true. What did he see right away that you really couldn't?
Oh, yeah, I was just full of shit. And, that's really again, this is why it was such a good exercise. Same thing for me showing up to the writers group. When they were like, "This isn't good," I was like, "I'm a doctor. Like, put some respect on my name." But this is a huge problem. Most doctors think that way, right? They're like, "Oh, I'll just automatically be good at this, and also, like, you have to give me special accommodations because I have this expertise." But anyway, what my husband was picking up on is that it was just not even it was basically like a fictionalized story of my life. I really thought that it was true. But for instance, the general shape of that manuscript was like a child genius who is perfectly nice, pretty angelic, shows up to the hospital, and in residency, everyone's mean to her. We don't know why. Probably because they're just jerks. And you know, in the end, she makes it through and she triumphs. And it's like, yeah, that is not true. Like I'm not an angel. For one, I'm like fairly adversarial, and I'm not non-confrontational. So even evaluating my own role, but this is why I've changed like almost to the point that it's unrecognizable probably as a person. I just like was not previously a person who probably took a lot of accountability for the ways in which I did not de-escalate. De-escalating is probably one of my biggest weaknesses. Even now, I'm getting there. I'm getting to like a workable amount of de-escalation. It is not my strong suit. So, therefore, if somebody antagonizes me, I almost always will hit the escalate button. That is obviously like has led me to some of the troubling places that I got into like over the course of my life and book and residency and things like that. So I do I think that was just like really helpful. And not only that, but some of a funny example of an issue that I had in my first draft of the manuscript, and this is just more from like a novice writing standpoint, is that I did not know the difference between the narrator being angry, which I was when I was writing, versus like the main character of the book. She can be really angry, but so there would be goofy things like the narrator would be like, I'm going to make up a name for this guy, Patrick. It would be like, rat-eyed Patrick walked into the room and sat down at the conference table. And it was like hilarious. They were like, whoa, like, the narrator like cannot omnipotently be saying that stuff. So literally then in the next draft, it was like Frances May sits down at the conference room table across from Patrick, and she's thinking to herself, I hate his fucking hideous beady rat eyes. Or whatever. And obviously we worked through that. That's not in the final draft of the manuscript, but like even very interesting lessons about like who is allowed to be angry, because even some early literary feedback I got from a New York City publishing house was like, I actually do like the bones of the story. Primary issue is a matter of tone and how angry the writer is palpably in this.
From a healing perspective, though, I feel like you needed to do that at the start, I would say.
Oh, exactly. But this even goes back to how I worked through my anger and I don't feel it now. It's not even because, again, if somebody was like, just be the bigger person, I might be like, no, I'm pretty oppositional. But when it became, your manuscript has issues of tone, it is too angry. And if we go back to my core initiative, which is like, I want to write the best book I can, I want to create great art. So you're saying, for me to have a shot at even making something great from an artistic standpoint, I need to tone down the anger massively? Okay. And it's funny because like I'll do it for that end.
It's beautiful how, as a kid, you had that knack of being an artist and being creative. And then after all this time, you're able to come full circle and be able to really bring that out of you into the real world.
Thank you so much.
You talked about earlier how, you had to go through an ego death to step out of the life of a surgeon into what you do now. You're still technically a surgeon. And have you been able to hold that identity or that title a little bit more with pride and care now?
I do, but I think that me holding it with pride and care now means that I respect myself a lot for what I went through. Like, I'm a tough cookie. I feel that I have proven to myself a couple times over my own grit. But it does come back to I don't need to like put that on other people. And so if people meet me at a party today, or for instance, we just went over to a new neighbor's house for tea, like I don't think that work came up at all during the tea, which is very nice. But even if it did, I'd be like, well, I work in startups.
Mm.
And people don't usually have follow-up questions about that. And it's not like that fancy of a title. I'm just saying, like, sure, I have a day job. I do some stuff by day. So I just think that that's what's funny about the pride in it, though, is that I think that back when I was like practicing and back when I was in the surgery culture and working as a surgeon, I just took pride in being able to hold that over other people. I don't even think I took pride in my work. And now it's like the inverse.
Yeah, you developed the identity, but you didn't have the person underneath that to hold it. And now that you've developed the person and who you are at your core, then you can branch out into different identities, it seems like.
hmm
Francis May Hardin, it's been great talking with you today. Where can people go to learn more about you? Any final thoughts you'd like to share?
Yeah, thank you so much. I really, I'm very grateful. That's mostly the emotion that I feel on a daily basis because I feel like I got a second lease on life, and really like turned around my physical and mental and spiritual health all in the past few years. One quote that I would encourage people to noodle on is no experience is wasted. I think it's very easy for us to just say like, well, I put so many years into my career, I put so many years into this relationship. If it doesn't align anymore, this is not the dress rehearsal. So I'm glad I'm certainly reporting from the other side of a big jump that like, some people would say, quote unquote, I wasted more than a decade and also however much money in undercompensated wages and then also like medical school education. But no experience is wasted. I wouldn't have the jobs that I have right now if I hadn't gone through all of that. So I suppose, have really like made peace with it. But thank you so much for having me on. Please feel free to connect with me on Instagram at Francis May MD. I'm on TikTok at Francis May MD, and my website is francismay.com. And then, of course, if anyone wants to check out the Hippocratic Collective, I think what's strongest about our network is just the many, many physician voices and future physician voices that we have, because it takes a village.
Awesome. Great talking with you today.
Thank you.